Hey, welcome back to another episode of Teletype Talk. I'm your host, Joe. So, we've got a few things today. We're going to be picking up with the 4-pattern, 1-voice patch, or scene, that we built in episode 2. We're going to add some trigger sequencers to this to play some drums along with our sound. And we're going to do some Ansible integration over the I2C or II bus that's connected here. So we're going to use Ansible for a couple different things. So got some exciting stuff in store for you. But to get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about live mode and interacting with your scene using live mode. So there's some really fun stuff you can do here. We've already kind of gone through and done some things as far as interacting, as far as changing these values around in here, changing the loop lengths, changing the start and end points and things like that. So we've already done quite a bit, but there are some additional things you can do from the live command prompt. You may notice that the sound is a little bit different this time. I've changed the patch up, so let me just quickly explain what you're hearing. The primary oscillator now is the ER301. It's using something called single cycle, which is a wavetable oscillator. And it's just kind of droning here on channel 1. The pitch is being controlled by CV1, which is this column right here on Teletype. The output of that is being fed into Morgasmatron. Morgasmatron is acting not just as a filter here, it is acting as a 2-pole low-pass filter. But it's also kind of acting as my amplitude VCA. So that's being driven by the trigger on trigger 1. That's being fed into Zadar over here and triggering Zadar. We've got, I believe output 3, column 4 over here is controlling the morph on Zadar, so it's kind of morphing that envelope around and giving different, release times and things like that. It is set up as a sustain envelope over here. And then Zadar is controlling the frequency of Morgasmatron. That's what's making it act kind of like a VCA. And let's see, I think we've got column 3 and CV out 2 over here controlling the wavetable scan on the ER301. So it's just kind of causing it to scan around that wavetable. And I do have a little bit of slew set up on it so that it doesn't jump around, but kind of glides smoothly to different positions in that wavetable. These wavetables are from Adventure Kids waveforms. So you can just kind of see here as it moves around, it's kind of scanning between those different single cycle wave shapes and interpolating smoothly between them. I think that's about it for the patch, so I wanted to start it back up and do just a little bit of live coding with it. So we'll have some fun here. Let me turn the volume back up and we'll just kind of talk through a few things you might be able to do. One thing I can do here is to change the gate length of my trigger. We know we've got the trigger coming out of trigger 1. Let's do TR time 1. Let's set it really short, like 20 milliseconds. Maybe go up to something a little longer. Another thing I can do is add an offset to my pitch voltage that's coming out of CV1. So if I do a CV off for offset, offset number CV number 1, and let's set it to a note value of 12. That'll be an octave. Maybe even go up to 24. I could add a little bit of slew to that CV. CV slew 1. Let's try 20 milliseconds. So hopefully that gives you a lot of fun ideas to keep modifying your patch in real time with the Teletype's live mode. All right, I mentioned we wanted to add some trigger sequencers to this scene. So we've already got our 4 patterns in use here. And hopefully, if I left you with something last time, it's that these patterns can store any integer values that you want to store in them. And their meaning is, essentially whatever you have configured in your script. So they can mean just about anything. We're going to continue that concept today with these trigger sequencers. And also kind of demonstrate that these can be used, we can even reuse a single pattern for more than one thing. So we've already got to kind of get the built-in trackers, like the pnext, already dedicated, each of them to one of these sequencers. So in order to add these trigger sequencers, we're going to have to essentially roll our own. So let's take a look at doing that. I'm going to make an assumption here that my patterns are only going to be so long. I've got 64 steps here. I'm just going to come down here to an unused area. Zero things out from my previous experiments here. And let's just say my pattern's never going to be longer than 30, those upper patterns. And so we can start to use some of these slots that are available further down to do some other things with. So what I want to do is turn these into trigger sequencers. And essentially I'm going to start with slot 30 and in pattern 0, and I'm going to use that to define how long I want the sequencer length to be, this pattern length to be. So let's put a placeholder in there like 8. Next, I'm going to come back over and find an unused script. And it looks like 3 is my first unused one. So let's use that. The first thing I would need to do is actually trigger that script from something, and Metro is a great place to do that from. So let's do remember that $sign is kind of the shortcut for script. So let's just consolidate it right now and do a $3. So that will fire script 3 every time Metro ticks. And what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is read this value that I've stored in pattern 0, slot number 30. And in order to do that and make sure I did it, I'm going to store this in a global variable. So let's set d equal to pn, which is going to fetch a pattern value. Let's do 0, 30. And if I come back over here and use a tilde to bring up my live display, you can see that it set d to an 8. So that looks like that worked. Now that I know it's working, I don't necessarily need to see it anymore. So instead of using d, which is a global variable, I've only got 8 or so global variables. I'm going to switch this to be a local variable. And there are really 3 of them. There's I, j, and k. And unlike a global variable, which, there's only 8 of them in the whole system, these local variables, each script has their own copy of I, j, and k. And, script 3 can't read script 4's j, and script 4 can't read script 3's j. So it gives me a lot of extra variables that I can use. So they're just kind of owned by the script, and they'll retain their values within that script. So let's set j equal to, this is going to be basically the pattern length. The next thing I'd like to do, now that I know it's going to be 8 long, is I actually want to start a counter in pattern 0, slot 31. So let's come back over to our script and make that happen. And I'm going to consult the help here to find out how to do this. If I go over here to patterns, down here I've got an operator that will increment the value a by b in a pattern, pn.plus. Let's try that out. So we'll do pn.plus, and we're talking about pattern number 0, and we wanted slot 31, and I just want to add 1 to it. And if we come over here, we can now see that we've got slot number 31, and it's just counting up and up and up toward the sky. Well, I actually don't want it to count that high. I really only want it to go to 8, and then I want it to reset back to 1. So let's come back to our script and make that happen as well. I'm going to put a new line in here. And I'm going to say if pattern number 0, 31, I want to see if, let's see if that's greater than or equal to 8. What I want to do is set it back to 1. Let's see if that does what I expected. So it looks like it's counting up. And actually it goes up to 8, but then it jumps back to 2. And I think the reason for that is when we set it back to 1, we're instantly incrementing it again by 1. So instead of a 1 here, let's set it back to 0. And hopefully you can see here on the video now that that's counting up from 1 to 8. Cool. So ideally what I want to do is I want to start with number 32. My pattern is going to be 8 long. And I want to read pattern number 0, slot 32, plus whatever is in the value of 31 here. And I want to read that value. So let's put a sample value in here. I'm just going to put a 1 in here. Let's come back over to the script. So now we're reading that counter. And let's again set a global variable so that we can see what's happening. I'll just reuse D. And we're going to set that equal to pattern number 0. And then we're going to do, we're going to add the contents of pattern number 0, 31. And we're going to add 31 to it. So we're basically saying add 31 to whatever this counter is on and get the value that's stored in that slot. And so you can see here that every 8 metro ticks, D is flipping to a 1. That's in the first slot, and then it's for the next 7 ticks, it's going back to a 0. Cool. Again, I don't necessarily want to use this global variable here if I don't have to, and I don't. I've got a local variable left here. I can use K. So let's switch to that. So now K is either going to contain a 0 or a 1. So let's do if equal to K1. Then let's trigger. Looks like my next available trigger port is number 3. So let's do a trigger pulse on 3. Hopefully you can see there. Yeah, I think you can see through the camera that that seems to be firing well. So I've got a kick drum set up on this red cable. Let me connect that. And I think on the ER301 here, I'm just going to go ahead and temporarily mute out my voice so we can hear what's going on just with the trigger sequencers. Let me turn this up. All right, let's change the pattern a little bit here. Let's put another one here. And let's change the pattern length so that this is more of an odd time. So I've got a 7 length pattern with the kick firing on 1, 2, and 4. Actually, that doesn't look quite right. That's a 7. This is still counting to 8. Let's debug that. So let's see here. We're saying we've already set this here. So let's say if pattern 031. Oh, I hard coded an 8 in there, didn't I? Oh, how silly of me. Let's change this to a J. J is our pattern length, so if the counter is greater than the pattern length, we'll set it back to 0. Let's try now. It looks like it's counting up to from 1 to 7 now. Yeah, I think that is working just like we want. So let's build another one. So again, these values mean whatever we put in there. In this case, the 7 means loop length. I think I'm actually going to change that back to 8 to make things a little more normal. And let's just maybe turn that beat off. So let's build our next trigger sequencer. So I think this is going to be a little bit easier because we've already got one. We could pick our next unused script, which is 4. And let me just copy the code that's in here. So I'm going to use Shift down to select all these lines, Alt C to copy, come over to script 4 and do an Alt V to paste. And what I'd like to do now is just start to change these references. So we're talking about pattern number 0 in this line. Let's flip over and we'll just change that to a 1. So now we're talking about, this was pattern 0. Now we're talking about pattern 1. So let's see, we need to change this everywhere. We'll change that to a 1, and that to a 1, and that one, and that one, and that one. And then down here, I need to pick a different trigger to fire. So let's do 4. Now, let's see, I haven't put my lengths in here yet, so let's do 8 on this one as well. And let's just put a 1 here. And my counter doesn't seem to be working yet. Let's see, so we did J is pattern 130. Yep, +1. Well, let's troubleshoot a little bit. Let's set D equal to this now, so we can go back and look at D, and D says 0. So I think we've got a problem there. So we did put an 8 here. Oh, I know what the problem is. Nothing is firing that script. So let's pop back over to Metro and also fire script number 4. Now D has an 8. Let's go back to script 4. Let's change this back to a J because that's what we're referencing down here for the loop length. Cool. So now we're both counting. And it looks like I'm getting a trigger here every so often. I've got a snare sound that I'm going to connect that up to. And let me turn my mixer back up. And I've got nothing out of there. Did I get the wrong cable? No. I believe what I've done on this snare is put a VCA on there. Let me just temporarily get rid of that. We'll bypass it. Cool. Let's just mix the oscillator back in for a second. Okay, so the reason this VCA is here is because I actually want to have the numbers in this column represent something a little bit different. So in the kick drum pattern over here, we had these set to 0 or 1, basically just on or off, fire the trigger or don't. Over here, I actually want to have these control the volume of that snare. So let's give that a shot. If I come back over here to script 4, we still want to fire the trigger as long as it is greater than 0. But I also want to set a CV here. So I'm going to do CV, and it looks like my next available one is 4. And we're going to set that equal to K. Actually, we'll set that equal to volts K. CV dot, oh, it's not CV dot 4, CV4 equal to volts K. So we don't see much there yet. Let's change some of these values. So let me change this to a 10. Let me add another one here and change this to like a 7 and maybe a 5. Cool. So we're getting some different CV values out of here in addition to the trigger. And let me connect this back up. Over here on the VCA, I've got that set to control the level of this VCA. You can see it's moving to different values. So if I unbypass this, and what are we missing here? So we've got, if K is equal to 1, we're firing the trigger. We're going to have to change this a little bit to, if it's greater than 0, we'll fire the trigger. Let's move these back a little. Add the oscillator back in. Let's see how that sounds. Sounds pretty good. Let's do one more. So I'm going to come back to my scripts. I'm going to find the next free one, which is 5. This time, let's be smart and go ahead and add that to Metro right away. So every Metro tick will fire script 5. And again, let me copy from script 3. We'll paste these in here. So the first thing we have to do is change our pattern references here. So now we're looking at pattern 2. Let's go ahead and put a loop length in here. So we'll switch this reference to pattern 2. That one. That one. That one. And let's see. This one I wanted to do, first of all, I'm out of trigger ports. On the top here, they're all full. So what can we do about that? Well, you remember out on number 2, I have a clock coming out of here. So if I didn't have an Ansible here connected through I2C, I would probably go ahead and sacrifice that clock and use that for my next available trigger port. But I do have an Ansible here that's connected behind the scenes through I2C. And when you have nothing connected to the USB input of the Ansible, it acts as a teletype expander. So these trigger outs become TR 5 through 8, and these CV outs become CV 5 through 8. So let's go ahead and set this to trigger 5. I need to come back here and make sure this is counting. And let me just put a 1 in here. So now you can see we're firing that trigger port on Ansible. But I also want to set these up to mean something different. So this one's, binary, fire the trigger or don't. This one fires the trigger if we're greater than 0 and also sends a voltage out of the CV port. For this one, I'd actually like to make this a probability that the trigger will fire. So let's come back over here to our script here, and instead of if k equals 1, let's change this to probability k. So whatever number is in that column that we're reading, that'll be the probability that we'll fire trigger pulse 5. All right, so let's put some numbers in here. Let's make 100% chance it'll fire on this first beat. And maybe let's just make it a 50% chance it'll fire on this beat. So if you're watching here, I always get that first trigger. Sometimes I get 2. So I think that's working like I expect. Let me go ahead and wire that one up. This one I have connected to Shapeshifter up here, and it's just set up in sequencer mode, and it's creating a new random sound. It's randomizing all of its settings on every pulse that I'm sending in here from Ansible, and it's also in percussion mode, so it makes kind of a rhythmic sound. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, the voice back. Cool. The last thing I wanted to address over here was our resets. So we haven't done anything to reset. We have a reset for our voice, but we don't have a reset for these triggers, and as you can see, they're kind of out of sync right now. So we did that back in script 7, I think. So if we hit F7, it would reset those. And what that does is fires script 8 in a loop from 0 to 3. And we come over here and do this. I think we can actually optimize this code a little bit. So there are some newer commands that let you specify, basically we're running this 3 times, and we're setting the pattern number equal to either 0, 1, 2, or 3, and then we're setting pi equal to the index equal to the starting point of the loop. I think we can consolidate here. So let's take this line and put our loop here instead. Loop 0 to 3. And let's do pn.i. This allows us to specify the pattern that we're talking about, and that pattern is going to be I. And let's set that to pn start. I. And then I think we can eliminate this line, and I think we can eliminate this entire script. And let's also do the same thing with our trigger patterns. Let's do loop 0 to 3, and we're going to do pn, and I think we stored the counter in 31, so we'll do pn I 31, and we'll just set that back to 1. So let's see if that works. I should be able to fire script 8, and we should see these all sync. So that looks like that's working well. And if I come back up here to the patterns, if I press F8, I want to see these sync up to the top as well. Good. Looks like we're all good there. The last thing I'd like to do here is give myself some hardware control over this reset. In case, I don't want to have my keyboard plugged in and still be able to play with this. So what I'd like to do is hook that up to Ansible's button 1 so that it performs the reset. So let's take a look at doing that. And I think that this one, button 1, I think this is referred to as state, I think it's state 11. Is it state 11? It might be 9. Let's try state 11. So I do that and it gives me a 0. If I hold down button 1 and issue that again, yep, it gives me back a 1. So we can tell whether this button is pressed or not by referring to state 11. So let's come back over to our Metro script. And every Metro pulse, let's also tell it to fire script number 8. Now right now this is just going to reset it every time, so you see our patterns are never going to move. But if we come back to script 8 over here, let's insert a new line here. And let's do if state 11. If state 11 equals 0, meaning the button's not pressed, let's break, meaning we're not going to execute the rest of the script. We're just going to jump right back out of it without doing anything. So now we can see our patterns are still running. If I press this button, we see them jump back to the top. And let's see, here are our trigger counters. Let's make sure this works with those. Yeah, looks like we're good. All right, so in conclusion, we talked about adding some trigger sequencers here, and we've talked about using the same pattern for multiple things. So all of these patterns are in use both for melodic sequencers and rhythm sequencers. Hopefully we've reinforced the concept that the numbers that you store in these patterns can mean anything you want them to. Here we have them meaning trigger on or not. Here we have them firing a trigger and also controlling a voltage out that's modulating the level of our snare drum. And over here we have them set to a probability that a trigger will fire. We've talked about using Ansible over I2C or II and using it as a teletype expander. We've also talked about using live mode to interact with your scene and do even more things in real time. I think that's it. I hope you've enjoyed. At this point, I think all there is to do is to let Teletype play us out.